In December of 2024, Amazon Prime Video released the first season of an adult animated anthology series titled Secret Level. The premise of the show was various short stories from various game franchises, and while the inclusion of Concord, of all things, is the funniest part of the show in retrospect, what we care about for today's topic is the Pac-Man episode. Built as this gritty, dark tale on the character, we're shown this human-like thing summoned to a world of monsters and ghosts, met by this Pac-Man-esque robot sphere named Puck, who tasks him with escaping the maze, and that he may eat or be eaten. There are certainly layers to this story beyond lol look edgy Pac-Man, but after you pass the ideas like learning through experience and the cyclical nature of this world, where they end up right back where they began, being allegorical to restarting a game or whatever this is supposed to be, it's still edgy Pac-Man. It's also a tie-in to an upcoming video game. Shadow Labyrinth was announced as a fully fledged video game after the Secret Level episode was published and released a little over half a year later. Given this timing, it's easy to assume the game is an adaptation of the show, but the reverse is true, with the development going all the way back to 2020. With the first thought on their mind being, how do we make Pac-Man dark? They took the idea of the maze and eating things and went, oh, how about a 2D Metroidvania, then slap some enemy-absorbing things in, while they glared at a copy of Hollow Knight on their shelves. Now, whatever there is to say about this game moving forward, it is, by all means, a competent Metroidvania. If that is a genre you like, then you will like this game. If that is a genre you don't like, then you will definitely not like this game. Probably the biggest issue with recommending Shadow Labyrinth basically comes down to opportunity cost, in that there is probably a better version of whatever you like in this you could be playing instead, and for a cheaper price. This game does a lot of things and does them well, but very little here is completely unique to itself and in a genre that's well explored in the indie scene. The face of the game, the first impression hook it gives to lure people in, comes down to that edgy Pac-Man facade, which, no matter how you cut it, is a gimmick and a niche one at that. The novelty of old family-friendly thing is now adult and edgy might lose its muster after the 30 or so hours it takes to beat this game, so there will need to be a bit more to it to justify its own existence, and well, let's just get to it. Let's start with the story, cause why not? The very first scene of the game, besides some random child being erased on the main menu, is a giant mech going through a mini tutorial to then fight a bigger mech that then destroys both you and the spaceship you are on with a giant laser, while this is observed by a waifu in the distance. Once that happens, the soul of the gamer from earlier is floating through interdimensional space until it is dragged through a portal, and from there the main character is spawned. A small Pac-Man-like robot called Puck introduces herself, saying he was her 8th attempt, and then guides you through the prison to a sword. The cloaked figure attempts to interact with the sword despite lacking any arms, but gets pushed away by the sword's aura. At which point, the mysterious shape that dragged you into the portal shows up, turns into an arm, or simply spawned it, I'm not sure which, attaches it to number 8, allowing you to pick up the sword and proceed forward. Eventually, you encounter a boss, kill it with your sword, at which point Puck then merges with you, summoning a massive shadow version of herself to consume the corpse of the enemy, granting an ability to the main character. Puck then separates from number 8 and continues to lead him forward. A couple scenes happen, you fight a certain currently unnamed character, then you find what Puck was leading you to. The remains of the robot you were controlling in the opening scene, only now corrupted by a G-host, which you must fight off before consuming the Gaia robot, gaining the ability to turn into it. You keep moving forward until eventually you get to the point where your target is within eyeshot and your goal is conveyed. You will use a giant tower to kill a Titan. Puck is incapable of fighting on her own, so she summoned your soul and put it into a body of her own making to help finish her mission. This is the base starting point of the story. Explaining further breaches into spoilers territory, but as it's so out there and not at all what you'd expect, a full explanation of everything is simply something I must do. This game takes place in the United Galaxy Space Force timeline, a retroactive timeline setting up various Namco games, most notably from my glance Galaxia, Galaga, and Dig Dug of all things. The main character of Shadow Labyrinth is named Thebe. She is an android described as being composed of biotech nanites, but from various tidbits throughout the game is shown to have grown up and developed in some manner, implying a more human history than that description gives. She has a twin sister named Aegina, who was a natural prodigy and someone Thebe admired but could never measure up to. As Aegina climbed the ranks within UGSF, Thebe felt abandoned and vowed to prove that she was more than an inferior copy of her twin sister. Enter Gamp, this mysterious figure later revealed to be some AI-like brain who's controlling multiple enemy factions against the UGSF, and is also the main antagonist of the Xevious series. There are apparently 6 of them, and one of them was already beaten by Aegina, which naturally pissed Thebe off, so when she was given the opportunity to take one down herself, she was overjoyed. Operation Ragnarok was a full frontal assault strike on Gamp's stronghold planet, with 800,000 ships carrying 200 million soldiers, and was intended as a diversion for the actual plan of Operation Cheyenne, where Thebe would pilot a superweapon into the planet to effectively blow open the planet and take out Gamp, who was hiding deep within. This mission failed. Before the weapon Cheyenne Gaia could break the final defensive layer, the drill shut down. Communication was lost, and the agents of Gamp got to Thebe, who chased her away, severely wounding her. 90 years later, Thebe recovered from her injuries after entering what was effectively a nanite-based healing coma, and the opening of the game starts. A second attempt against Gamp was made with a second Gaia, the robot you played in the start of the game, and Thebe watches it get shot down. Recognizing the remains of this Panzer Gaia could be her way of finishing her mission, she attempts to get to the drop site but is intercepted by various Gamp agents, notably the G-hosts. To get to the core's drop site, she decides to invoke dimension warp technology, something her sister helped develop and thereby understood well enough, in a desperate attempt to get an ally. This technology took a soul from another world and anchored it to some kind of vessel. This vessel had to be created from nanobite material, and since she was cut off from outside help, she somehow split off this material from her own body. She then proceeded to make a bunch of fruit for whatever reason, progressing in the same order as Pac-Man's fruit, until Temp 7 made someone she could work with. But that person refused to fight, so she tried again, resulting in number 8, the player character, though by that point she had expended so much material that she could now only take the form of a small, spherical drone alongside serious damage to her mental state. Number 7, and I'm not entirely sure how this played out, maybe it started differently but changed after the soul was sent back, or whatever, turned to be effectively a younger clone of Thebe, but due to her situation as barely a person, she was manipulated and effectively brainwashed by Gamp somehow, and thereby sicked onto Puck to stop her efforts against him. When they first meet, her face is blurred by an effect from Gamp to prevent Puck from recognizing her, though this is dispelled by their next meeting when the player character and Puck reach the top of Cheyenne Gaia. To activate the drill, Puck reveals herself as Commander Thebe, and after discovering there is not enough power to use the drill outright, she instead uses the system to contact the UGSF, who instead of accommodating her plans, try to supercharge the Gaia drill to effectively super nuke the planet. Gamp, not having this, decides to just teleport the planet away and then lasers the bridge. All the characters survive due to the intervention of the mysterious shape thing from earlier. Puck explains to Number 8 she belongs to the United Galaxy Space Force before moving along with no remaining plan. At this point, they stumble upon a whole other faction, the Bosconians, an indigenous tribe of people to this planet that happen to not be under GAMP's control, and from that, Puck strikes a bargain. By assisting them, they will supply her with a power source for the drill so that she can activate it and reach GAMP. After securing this resource and forging their alliance, they run into Thebe again. Get more reveals about their nature before she runs off and the game formally opens up. It turns out the Bosconian antimatter isn't enough to power the drill, but there are 2 other power sources out in the world that will suffice. You head out, you find them, then you team up with the Bosconians to head into the tower to activate the drill, of which upon setting up the power sources and making it to the main console, you run into Thebe again, who manifests power from GAMP in her own manner to consume and corrupt Puck, turning her into the Dark G-Host. There's a boss fight, and Number 8 literally rips Thebe out of GAMP's corruption, and the original and clone of Thebe have a heart-to-heart, resulting in Puck consuming Number 7 so she can return to her original form and activate Gaia. Once they are in the planet's core, there is a boss gauntlet of locks to get through before the final battle with GAMP is in effect. It eventually reaches the point where they release the Panzer Gaia's true form, the one you've been using the whole game, to destroy GAMP's true form, only to have him get the upper hand, putting Thebe at his mercy. Then that mysterious shape that's been around and helping you the entire game for no reason steps in, revealing herself to be Aegina the whole time. Number 8 then gets his second win, fires his sword into GAMP, giving them an opening to use the Gaia, which becomes a giant Pac-Man, consuming him, and winning the fight. It is at this point that everything is resolved. Aegina reveals she's part of an interdimensional organization called Baglis, which fights against the 6 GAMPs because it's very necessary for there to be 6 of them, and invites Thebe to join them. She accepts this and then sends the soul of Number 8 back, and the game ends. So that's the story. That's what happens. There are several things you can take away from it, but the first one would probably be that this has absolutely nothing to do with the tie-in TV episode in any way. The most it can do to pretend to be a prequel is the characters' numbers, as it's 7 in the episode and 8 in the game, but the 7th attempt here is not another swordsman. It's explicitly the Thebe clone. The attempts follow the chain of Pac-Man fruit for whatever reason, and her design explicitly includes bells, as that was her spawn in the progression. Even just the character of Puck and the nature of the world is vastly different. There's basically no comparison at all. The meme descriptor for this version of the character often comes down to edgy Pac-Man, but that's probably not the most accurate description. It's more like anime Pac-Man. You play as some gamer reincarnated from another world by a space military waifu for the purpose of fighting God with a giant mech suit. What am I supposed to take from this? Now, the plot is by no means trash. It's convoluted as hell, has multiple entities whose powers are not clearly defined, and various convenient things just sort of happen. But for what it is, it's fine. Most of the plot's impact comes from Thebe. Interacting with herself, forcing her to face down her inferiority complex with Aegina, results in real character development, and is well realized. Number 8 isn't a character at all. He doesn't have a single line of dialogue over the whole game. If anything, he's some kind of aspect of Thebe made manifest through the soul transfer process, in the same way Number 7 was, or at least became. Everyone else is sort of just around, and while the side characters aren't making insane decisions or what have you, no one else gets remotely close to an arc like Thebe does. Of course, this isn't primarily a story game. Dedicated story sections are here, but there aren't that many and don't intrude for too long. This is a video game first and foremost, and the vast majority of your time with it won't be contemplating sister issues, but knee-deep in the gameplay. The actual game here, to no one's surprise, can be compartmentalized into 3 aspects: combat, platforming, and exploration. all of which have various degrees of interaction. Starting with what I'd argue is the most important aspect here, the combat. Number 8 fights with the sword, has a basic 3-hit combo and a couple directional variants to his swings. Probably the most notable one here would be the air swing down, allowing him to bounce off enemies, and even possesses some traversal usage. You also have access to a ground dodge, allowing you to dash through attacks and enemy bodies with its invincibility, but at the cost of what is effectively the in-game stamina known as ESP. This resource will automatically regenerate, but if it's ever completely depleted, it will cut off the player from any move that requires ESP until fully restored. As the game goes on, you will either just find powers or defeat bosses, at which point Puck will fuse with number 8 and consume the corpse of the defeated foe, obtaining some ability reflected in the manner the boss fought. Unlocked powers include a dedicated sword beam special move known as ESP Blast, an air dodge, a parry, a shield, a grapple, much later a double jump and a ground pound, the works. There are, of course, only so many buttons on the controller, so abilities allocated to the same button like the parry and shield, and later different special moves, can be switched on the fly. One of the most important abilities is the Gaia, a giant Pac-Man mech that you can transform into by clicking both sticks. The Gaia is invincible. The worst an enemy can do to it is take a slight chunk out of its timer before you revert back to your regular body. Now, the Gaia also has the ability to consume enemies. When most enemies are killed, their corpse doesn't immediately disappear. This is the time the game allows you to invoke Gaia and consume them by hitting the right stick of all things. Doing this grants you two things. One, the act of consuming enemies is the only thing that recharges the gauge to resummon Gaia, and two, you gain some material correlated to the enemy in question. While you can do this consume move in the Gaia form, you can also invoke some sort of Gaia stand of yours to consume corpses at any time in your regular swordsman form, but at the cost of ESP. The rigmarole of stopping your momentum to grab your enemies every time instead of just dropping materials feels like an unnecessary step at first, but there is a reason it's this way. The move not only costs ESP, which can lock you out of various other moves you may need if you overuse it, but it locks you in place, leaving you open to other attacks. It's a risk to use this move when around enemies, and as other encounters get bigger and harder, it's a real decision in the moment on if you want to go for the extra resources and maybe a transformation in the near future, or play it safe and keep the ESP for other options so you don't die. The three main options for coping with enemy attacks are the dodge, the parry, and the shield. The dodge is your default option, eventually upgraded to work in the air. The invincibility frames present are very generous, and probably the best benefit it provides is the ability to switch sides on a larger enemy dedicated to a set attack. The parry is unlocked next, and probably speaks to the game's design in the most fundamental way. All enemies flash before they attack. The timing after said flash is different enemy to enemy, but the telegraph is always there. Red flashes indicate that the attack can be parried, whereas blue attacks absolutely cannot be. Most attacks in the game are red, and even bosses fall under these constraints. The possible utility from this one move is ginormous, and the potential for high-level play would truly be a sight to behold, but the benefit of hitting that parry varies from enemy to enemy. Some enemies are simply easier to take out this way, while others provide so little benefit, you wonder why you're bothering at all. It may be powerful and costs no ESP, but it's short-ranged and conflicts with the animation from sword slashing. You have to go all in on the reads, or else it won't work, and some attacks are so fast or so damaging that the risk just might not be there, even accounting for the blue attacks that straight up can't be countered. The general safer option you unlock later is the shield. Competing for the same button spot as the parry, it works on everything, but at the cost of ESP. The stronger the move you block, the more ESP you lose. This leaves you the most minus of your defensive options, but devoid of external factors, is built as the safe choice and definitely has its place from time to time. Now, there are a lot of different types of enemies in this game, and while some of them are more unique and demanding than others, a lot of them have a certain overlap. The smaller enemy that rushes you but dies in one hit, or the larger enemy with more choreographed attacks that lets you wail on them, tend to get clumped up in effect. Things are constantly changing, yes, but a lot of what you encounter you fight in the same way, and with the most cardinal sin committed being various enemy types that just say no to damage when in a startup animation or what have you, making exactly how much life these guys have a bit difficult to gauge. Constantly throughout the game, everything will pause and you'll be forced into a combat encounter. Waves of enemies will spawn, and if you want to progress out of the room, you must take them out. This is the purest admission it can make that this is a game about fighting, and on the whole, it does a pretty alright job. The highlights are the bosses. They play around with various mechanics, and while demanding at times, are completely learnable. It is on these bosses that a stun mechanic also comes into effect, where enemies can be stunned if enough damage is dealt. However, while this applies to everyone, regular enemies effectively always die prior to reaching that state, so it's more of a side note than anything. Now, platforming in this game is regularly demanded. The game is laced in various instant kill walls, be it either lava or lasers or buzzsaws or whatever that will one touch take a bar of life and spit you out at the nearest safe floor. Jumping between small moving platforms and timing environmental hazards is a favorite of the design. Now, the general controls are tight enough that most platforming isn't too brutal. Probably the most interesting thing going on in this front is the grapple. Once unlocked, it becomes the level design's favorite thing to use, busting out vertical spaces and large gaps on a whim. The controls to the grapple with respect to the grapple points are basically perfect. You fly in the direction you grappled, but you can stop and reposition yourself to where you want to go. Mastering this aspect of traversal doesn't take too long and is among the game's highlights. Something that also pops up a lot are these walls, allowing you to cling to them as Puck. Controls as Mini Puck are weirdly elaborate. There is a default auto move with a break to stop you, as well as a controlled movement option you can switch to on a button push. You even have an option to display a jump arc, so you have complete understanding of what your inputs would do in that scenario. Probably the most frustrating part of this Puck mode, however, is fighting as it. You can attack out of it in a spinning motion, and then after connecting, enter a regular air combo, but until you're out of this mode, you are cut from your defensive options. Dodging isn't an option on these walls, you just need to either not be there, or deal with the enemy outright. So when the game makes you fight like this, it can get a bit difficult. This game does have dedicated platforming sections, and like the combat, comes in various degrees of bullshit. But they are far fewer than the full-on combat sequences. For the most part, the platforming is brought down to a mid-difficulty level spruced with enemies for good measure, with the focus not on being able to do it, but where to go. Now, the exploration. This is a goddamn Metroidvania through and through. The world is a giant maze, which I guess is fitting. The main thing it will feel like you are doing is doubling back on yourself. This world is laced with one-way doors to be opened only from one approach. The general idea being that you made a little progress, so you've now opened a shortcut to cross through that area faster. The core of the challenge here lies with enduring your exploration. You have a set amount of HP and a set amount of HP tanks, something you can expend on a command to restore a set amount of HP that will effectively be a full heal until you really expand your HP bar later. The only way to restore your HP is to visit either a save point or a checkpoint. The full-on save points allow for teleporting, allocating skills and whatever alongside restoring all of your expended HP tanks, whereas checkpoints heal you, yet only permit you to return to the last save point and don't restore HP tanks. Furthermore, if you die after using a checkpoint, you will retain the number of HP tanks you had when you last saved there, so biting the bullet and using an HP tank often means that's a block of health you've locked off until you've seriously pushed into an area. There are effectively no other ways to restore your health. If you happen to find a health increase, I guess that will restore you, and alternatively, death will give you back your full health bar for whatever you want to consider that, but for all intents and purposes, that is it. While enemies drop a basic currency, they don't drop health. And therefore, the fact that dying doesn't undo any of these shortcut paths you've opened, the game becomes a constant loop into itself. So when the inevitable arrives and you die, you can skip forward and backtrack into the same spot. The world itself is laced with collectibles, and some quality of life options makes finding these not a huge pain. The world map autofills around areas you've been, and if any of these areas filled in contained a collectible, it will mark it as such regardless of if you've seen it on screen. A lot of these collectibles seriously power up the player. The obvious, like extra bars of health to extra HP tanks, are present to more specific functions like special material required for upgrades. But if we are to be truthful, a lot of the collectibles aren't at least immediately helpful. A decent chunk of them are lore documents, and the vast majority is the major side quest collectible of Sparkling Stones, which add up over time to give you various power-ups, but only over collective bunches and not automatically. The overworld map is designed to tell you if any collectibles in an area have been picked up, but unfortunately that includes the random pellets on the side of the puck tracks, so the effectiveness of this feature is questionable. Probably the biggest problem with the overall world is picking up enemy materials. Through the use of your Gaia, enemy corpses give you materials, and these are implemented in effectively every type of side thing in the game. The purchasing of skills, accessing bosses. There are a lot of uses for these materials, but what you'll probably find is you're lacking a lot of at least one type of material to do anything. It doesn't take long till every skill to purchase requires multiple materials only dropped by mini bosses. The only enemies in the game with multiple different materials that could maybe drop and only found in specific spots. While these guys do respawn, it isn't immediately, so farming them is a pain. Meanwhile, the overlap all the regular enemies have with various material types when you can only possess a cap of 99 makes engaging with this feature a bit fruitless. Another thing to note is the game is remarkably open. It does a fairly good job funneling you forward for say the first 8 hours, but once the grapple is on the table and the objectives are sort of just thrown out there, you can find yourself stumbling around very far. A lot of these areas connect to one another in manners that don't seem necessary given the lenient teleport system, and major chunks, usually in relation to these connections, don't ever need to be outright explored. There are multiple major areas in this game that you never need to visit, and I'm not talking places like Thanatos Valley, which are clearly a side area. I'm talking places like Labyrinth of the Giant Tree, which is located effectively smack dab in the middle of the map. You can get by through the areas around it, and the only thing you find there specifically is the ground pound ability, of which I was able to get to the final boss without. A feat which was stupid on my part, as the sword upgrades were also locked behind the ground pound, but I went without them, which is more or less the forte of this game. You can get remarkably far through brute force alone. Take the area Tombstone of the Fallen Soldiers. This is the graveyard area shrouded in darkness that you keep having to activate sources of light for. They want you to go and get a night vision upgrade, which lets you see a little better, and the game explicitly tells you where it is. But I forgot where that was located, so I just went without it. Sure, it borders on pitch black, but you can clearly see enough to brute force your way through, and I full cleared the area before ever getting the upgraded intending for this area only. And that's just how this game goes. The double jump upgrade is a particularly late and to the side upgrade to get, and I'm not even entirely sure it's required. They might expect you to have found a ton of health ups, but because everything is more or less fair, you can take on even the toughest bosses with sheer nerve alone. That all being said, the areas in this game are varied and neat. The priorities and design differ area to area, though almost all of them come back to the looping back and opening shortcuts philosophy. Standouts are the aforementioned grave area with the light gimmick and the poison flower area where the day and night cycle kicks into effect, with nighttime being laced in poison requiring bouncing from cave to cave. A lot of these areas have sub-areas, basically a second layer stacked on top of the map that you enter and leave through doors. The size and elaborate nature of these layers depend on the area, but most of the time it's to connect spots on the map that don't immediately seem connected, and make it more confusing and maze-like. The general things to do aren't exactly lacking either. Once the main village is unlocked, there are various side quests all marked in your pause menu. The biggest one is obviously the Sparkling Stones, but you can also worm your way into multiple optional bosses, an optional major area, there's an arena to time trial previous bosses, but the most significant side thing would most definitely be the Pac-Man mazes. Scattered throughout the world with one in every major area except the final boss section, there are these Pac-Man mazes. Once the game decides you can do them, they become a time trial puzzle room where you play as Puck in the wall-clinging form, doing her best Pac-Man impersonation. Eat enough ghosts to access the fruit to move on to the next part of the maze until you go up against the boss ghost and take him out. The controls are exactly the same as many Puck controls, barring the small detail that you cannot use the swordsman's form in any way at all. Power pellets are almost never how you deal with ghosts here. It's almost always collecting all the regular pellets which sets something off, or smashing the ghosts over with geometry via various self-explanatory means, and the boss ghost almost always comes down in the end by you smashing yourself into him. Very few things in these rooms appear to be random, and following a set path executed perfect is often the way it seems you're supposed to go. Beat the boss at the end in the allotted time and everything you collect will be tallied. Get a little bit and you'll get one of the ghost symbols, which when all collected help out on a single phase of the final boss. Collect enough and you get something. I don't know what the 100% reward for any of these rooms is because I've never done it. Just finishing them is hard enough, but the number of ghosts and fruit you need to reach the max reward within your time constraints borders on comical. So comical that I highly doubt any substantial amount of players have ever reached it. While these sections are neat and a standout of the game, they are almost all non-required and first pop up fairly late. I'm talking like 8 hours minimum before you ever see it. The final stretch of the game includes 4 of these as part of the boss gauntlet, but besides those and the tutorial, this is a part of the game you must go out of your way to engage with. On to the presentation of this game. It's fine. The game runs well. My experience was that the opening section had a couple random stutters for whatever reason, but once it reached the main game, the performance was smooth. There's a definite 2D art style here. The foreground and background are distinct and laid flat, with all characters and objects being drawn and placed with a small range of available sprites to cycle through. The range of animation things have probably could be bigger, and enemies don't have all that many effects applied to them for just how much design they do have. It screams indie to me, which is by no means a bad thing. It's on the basic side, but the basic side is good, so who cares? The various areas use various colors, and the general atmospheric effects are on point, though we do have a fair bit of gray factory-like areas. I mean, they bothered to put in a day and night cycle, which is more added detail than they needed. Biggest letdown would probably be the music, in that you may forget there is any. Most of the time you'll be engaging in this generic nothing background sound. They were going with this Metroid mindset where the maze is an isolating place and the music reflects this with quieter ambience, except unlike Metroid, there aren't any real bangers anywhere. Now, allow me to present you something. The last main Pac-Man game before this was World Repack. A critique the game got when it first came out was the quality of the soundtrack. It wasn't trash, but various tracks sounded washed out. So, on update version 1.0.2, they completely redid the entire soundtrack, making pretty much every song go harder. Which is something I've never heard of prior. Compare that level of care to this. It's definitely better than literal white noise. It sets the tone of the area as well, and in that respect, the soundtrack is appropriate, but next to nothing on here you're going to want to listen to outside of the context of the game. Combat sequences / boss themes tend to be a bit higher energy and eventually bust out the choir from time to time, but again, it just comes off as generic and nothing Pac-Man-like, barring the tunes they used for the mazes, of course. Now, to be fair to the game, I'll provide a couple exceptions to this rule. The boss theme for Dark G-Host Thebe, titled Out of Options, was a standout for the various things it achieved. For one, it's a pretty good boss theme, but it also has this undercurrent feeling of tragedy built into it, making it extremely fitting for the fight it's used in. I also liked the main title rendition used during the credits for whatever that's worth. Get past the initial face of the package and examine the nuts and bolts of it all. Shadow Labyrinth is a good Metroidvania title for better and worse. The traditional I don't know where to go moment inherent to the genre is bound to occur as the map is so large, and so much of it exists seemingly just to loop into itself, that it's easy to get lost and confused. The game is also really hard, and while completely beatable, doesn't shy away from throwing the player into the deep end whenever it wants. The main problem starts to arise when you consider it a Pac-Man game, because, it really isn't. Sure, there are dedicated Pac-Man segments, but past those, any reference to the franchise feels more out of mimetic obligation than anything else. You should not be thinking of this as a Pac-Man game. It is a standalone, decently long, 2D Metroidvania intended for higher skill players. If that's what you want, then give it a try. But if you're an old school Pac-Man fan used to things like the World games, which are not only easier but much shorter, then this might not be what you're looking for.